Hello, and welcome to another episode of Next Generation's First Generation, a watch along podcast where you get to hear Patrick and Sascha. I'm Sascha. Is Patrick there?
I'm here.
Yeah, we are going to provide a commentary track. So feel free to queue up the episode if you like, or just listen along as you do your doohickeys. Today we are reviewing Borg, a very fun episode. Let's see, I believe this is the first human attempt to reach out to the Borg. Yep, this is where we discover they're not killing machines, but just masked individuals who have this AI dominating their personalities. So,
talked about best of both worlds. Every time we see the Borg, the rules change.
No.
They did not have set rules for the Borg for a long time.
Well, I hope you didn't watch the most recent episode of Picard. Oh my God. But that's for another podcast for another time. Here we are reliving Borg. So please queue up your devices. I'm going to give you the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, and play.
Captain's log, stardate 458.
Turn that down just a little bit.
The Enterprise is charting 6 stars.
There we go. We are charting star systems in the Angolas cluster. Isn't there a big telescope out there somewhere? And they want to colonize. They are looking at the beautiful, violent sun, I guess. They're getting a transmission. So this episode kind of marks the end of the colonizing period for the Federation, I believe. The reason why I say that is because we have instances where, they're always on the edge of the frontier looking for a new colony site. And after a while, that narrative dies off and we see more internal affair episodes rather than edge of the frontier episodes.
Well, yeah, the Enterprise is, of course, the flagship of the Federation. They are an exploratory vessel, but they are also very much a diplomatic vessel. And it's interesting what the politics are at play here, because we find this almost dead Borg that they decide to rescue because of the Hippocratic Oath of Dr. Crusher. And there's some conversation about that there has not technically been a declaration of war between the Borg and the Federation. And I think that that's a matter of opinion, because we know later on that all these ships were, Voyager's being built right now, which is to fight the Borg with. Defiant is a ship that was built to fight the Borg with. So it's a very interesting time. And this is Measure of a Man dialed up to 11.
Oh yeah, because they're taking it beyond a property issue and making it a political and existential threat issue.
Picard is at the end of this story, and this is why what this episode is so good, is it's a surprise. He's prepared to commit treason for one individual. And it's an individual that
you're gonna have to point that out when it comes up, because I don't remember that.
Yeah, it's providing aid and comfort to the enemy. It's
gotcha.
Treason, and he says that he will grant this guy asylum, even though he knows that the Borg will come after them, and he's like, we'll let that sort itself out. It sorts itself out. And our guy, Hugh, our Borg, is very much of the Spock mentality, where it's like, whoa, needs of the many.
Yeah.
That's all of you versus me. I can't do that.
Yeah. I believe that is Jonathan Delarco, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So this episode came out May 10th, 1992. So my 30-year younger self was traveling across the country, moving to Washington State. Where were you in 1992.
I know I watched this episode because anytime they brought back, whether or not Picard was still in the thrall of the Borg, which comes up in this, my mom would be on the edge of her seat watching the episode. When he does his interrogation of Hugh, she just really jumped. And it is quite a surprising scene.
Yeah. The seriousness on his face. There have been so many times where Beverly is kind of the ethical weather vane saying, no, we need to do this. And it totally gets in the way of everybody's plans.
That's why you have a doctor, though, because sometimes you need to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think it's kind of neat, though, that the doctor does want to make sure that life continues, even if they can't help them.
Mhm.
Worf is like, kill it now. Make it appear that it died in the crash. Oh, poor Worf.
He's the most security officer that he has ever been at any point on this show.
Mm-hmm. So they're bringing him aboard. They have made the decision. They don't really go into the reason for that, why they decide to bring him on board, other than Beverly kind of wanted him to.
And the Borg are going to come to this planet. They don't really know the timetable yet. They can't, but from what they know of the Borg, they are going to come to collect their dead.
There's all that tech that they could totally plunder too. Just walk right by it. I love how they just kind of glued stuff to a shipping container. There's your ship debris.
But that's great, though. I mean, I miss being able to do stuff like that.
Brings you back to theater days.
Yeah.
All right, we need to build a back alley. Grab the garbage can from your mom's house.
I love Troy here. Does, totally the right thing. It's like, okay, everyone saw Picard, make this decision to bring a Borg on board. Almost everybody on this ship knows what that means. So how I react to this is going to affect the morale of the crew extremely. So whatever look she has on her face when she leaves that room is going to be really important to everybody on the bridge.
Because they'll know that she made some kind of impact on his decision. I do appreciate that she brought up his past trauma and is kind of calling him out to be, are you being objective about this?
Mm-hmm. Well,
Picard sorry, go ahead.
Everybody does what they're supposed to do in this episode, which is why but it still surprises you, which is why it's such a great episode.
Mm-hmm.
It's everybody on the team working within their roles.
It's funny, if you look at the history of Picard and the Borg, he seems to interact pretty level-headed in the next gen episodes, but in the movies he just becomes this unhinged, traumatized person who's seeking revenge.
That's why I loved it when I first saw First Contact, but I am not a big fan of that movie anymore, especially because it again changed the rules and introduced the concept of a Borg queen.
Oh, yeah.
Held fast to. This is at a time when there is no Borg queen. All of the Borg are just part of a gigantic whole. WHOLE, not HOLE. And so the idea here is that, if we put this puzzle in there that they have to keep doing and it keeps expanding, that'll shut everybody down. The interesting thing is that they don't do that once they start doing it, they'll die if they don't uncouple themselves from the collective.
Mm-hmm.
Never thought of.
Immediately, Picard goes to weaponizing, and his eyes look really funky too. He's got this dead stare, and they're super glassy, small pupils. I mean, that's a good hate look right there.
Yeah.
Superb acting. But if you back it up just a bit, you have all the right people in the room, because both Geordi, Beverly, and Picard were all, right there when Picard was aboard. I don't think Worf was in the room. I think he was probably on the bridge somewhere.
No, he was on the rescue mission, but
oh yeah, that's right, with Shelby.
But after Shelby, who is only an outside observer, so Shelby would be the person that knows through research the second most about the Borg. Picard is the guy that has the firsthand knowledge, and Picard can say that they're an invasive virus.
This is one of the few times, though, where I have to say is that Picard is not being a leader here. He's being, I don't want to say dictator, but he's just like, it's happening this way. This is what we're doing. And I'm pooling resources from you at the table, rather than letting the department heads kind of figure out the problem and let it naturally take an organic solution.
And he's got to be confident that if he reports that this happened to Starfleet, that they're going to side with him too.
So here's the dilemma. We have an enemy that we have no hopes of making peace or negotiate with, and we have to do anything we can to survive. So it's more about, it's an us or them mentality right now. And it seems like Troy, Beverly, and Data are the only ones that are kind of on the fence. I love the whole the mime act there with the force field. So we have our hungry Hugh in the brig looking for power.
Something to plug into, yeah.
Okay, touch the wall. Trip over the imaginary cat.
Yeah.
So when they were coming up with the character of Hugh, I saw that Jerry Taylor was kind of honing in Edward Scissorhands.
Yes. It's a very recent movie. That movie came out in 1990, so it's only 2 years ago. Jerry Taylor would go on to do a lot of work with the Borg on her show, Voyager, which again changed the Borg rules. Now here is where the surprises start to come. We got a fencing match, and it's Picard versus Guinan. And you wouldn't think that Guinan would be somebody who would enjoy fencing. And
I'll keep going, but I've got something to say about Guinan. So,
and that's where she starts from. It's like, wow, I don't really like this fencing thing, Picard. But once he starts talking about the Borg, she shows that she doesn't like it, but she's pretty friggin' good at it. She can take down Picard pretty quick. Just as, that's not what she chooses to use her listening abilities to do, but she can at this point cut anybody on the Enterprise to the quick if she wanted to. That's not her. That's not truly her personality, but here she's going to display that she has the ability to do that.
Well, she's got to make a point, and usually she doesn't drive the point home to people. She just asks them the right question so they arrive to their own conclusion.
She'll stab Q, and she'll stab Picard here in a minute.
So here's the thing about Guinan. You had mentioned earlier that every time we see the Borg, we rewrite the rules a little. I almost want to say that's true with Guinan as well, is that they always subtly add more rules to this character to kind of to try to box her in and define her role. But here they did a very good job at leaving it open-ended. Yeah, and there's the stab, just like you said.
And I don't think they ever say on the TV show her, or even in the movies that she's in. I don't believe they ever say the name of her race, the Illurians.
I want to say they did somewhere. Maybe I think it was in the movie where they had the Enterprise B rescuing the guys in the freighter.
But they were calling her species Illurians in the novels before they were ever that was ever vocalized on the show.
Gotcha.
And there's been, and we can argue this when we get to that movie. People always think that like Dr. Soren, the villain of that movie, is the same species as Guinan, and I do not think that that is the case.
Well, the only species that we saw that was of Guinan was his name was Martus, and he was in a Deep Space Nine episode with the luck machines. And he and Odo had a brief conversation about an Illurian, a race of listeners, but your crime is that you were listening too well or something like that. Obviously, he was turned out to be a con man. Anyway, so Geordi and Worf, what are they doing here? They are bringing in a power converter.
Yeah, so
and they're trying to feed him lunch.
But now Geordi and the Borg are having this conversation. And I want to say they brought it up prior to this, or maybe it was, I'm remembering it from a book that came out before this came out, which also heavily involved Guinan, that was called Vendetta. That the Borg are kind of, once the Borg get a little bit of individuality or thought, they're drawn to Geordi a little bit because they think he might be a Borg also.
That would have been neat if it was canon.
Yeah.
So let me ask you something. When Geordi kind of has this conversation with him about we versus I, the plural versus the singular, could you still have that conversation today?
Yeah.
Just calling someone out like that. So I worked in a forensic prison for a little bit for folks with mental illnesses. And there was a gentleman who worked in my art shop program as a janitor, and we were having a conversation, and he was kind of upset about some of the program changes that we made. So he politely came up to me and kept on saying, well, we don't think this is a good idea. We would try to do this. And we. And for some reason, just listening to his dialogue, I thought the guys must be representing a group of some kind, and he's the one who's coming forward. No, he always referred to himself as we. And I was immediately thinking of Hugh here when I kind of worked it out that he was using we as a singular and not as a plural.
Well, we already know that Hugh still thinks he's representing a collective.
Well, he's a spokesperson right now. If you want to get into Hugh's mind, it's kind of like a cell phone's been stolen, and it says you need to return this cell phone back to its owner, rather than you need to return me to the owner.
Which, if it was a cell phone, it would be more effective to say you need to return me to the owner, because it makes it a personal thing. But what's crazy about the Borg is it's not like a cult or a cultural indoctrination. It's plugged into people. Their self, if they ever had one, is erased, and you see that they even start with babies. So he may have come into the Borg as a baby, but it shows that empathy with him is a natural emotion. They could take his individuality, but they couldn't take away his want to empathize with other people. And I think that, I want to say, once the Queen comes into it, she does, of the Queen of the Borg I'm talking about, she think that like if everybody's like together and thinking the same thoughts, that there's no room for hate and that everybody is kind of on the same page.
Huh.
But I think this shows that when he's surrounded by people that are saying that they don't want what he has, he understands that.
Well, it's an adaptive social skill. And if anything, the Borg are really good at sizing up a situation and adapting to it. So it would make sense that they could actually pick up social skills from a cold environment rather quickly because he's not getting what he wants. The problem is the irony is that they usually are, stubborn little children with big guns who says, no, you're going to give me what you have. But in this situation, he's lost his agency. So he's lost his agency and he doesn't have the ability to make threats, so he can only interact. That's as far as he can go.
I am not hearing you anymore.
Oh, okay. Looks like we got some technical difficulties. I'm pausing at 25:56. Beverly's trying to get Hugh to come up with a name. And what we were just talking about, so we had some brief technical difficulty that interrupted our conversation. So before I was talking about how Hugh no longer has the ability to kind of come in and make demands. So he is now trying to adapt to the situation using some pretty basic openness social skills, which are uniquely absent from other liberated Borg we have seen.
Mm-hmm.
But Beverly and Geordi and Hugh have had a chance to name that Borg. But they chose H-U-E-E.
H-U-G-H.
So now they're giving him some spatial orientation tests.
Which it seems like no human would be able to do that.
It's a prosthetic eye.
Yeah.
Blame it on the tech. Well, it takes a visor to know a visor, I suppose.
That's some good oogity special effects, just like that cut up brain we see at the beginning of the episode and then later on. I love that decal in there.
Oh yeah, the laser decal.
Yeah.
It's very 90s. That was like a big thing back then.
I remember they did that on the cover of a National Geographic once. They had a skull that looked 3D.
Oh yeah, that's right. And look at those LED lights.
Mm-hmm.
It was very hard to get past they had the red, green, blue, orange, and yellow. But they couldn't, back then they could not make white. That was kind of the missing color in LED. They couldn't figure out how to make light LEDs until the early 2000s. And then now you can get the full rainbow.
Immediately makes me want to sing the Ludwig von Duck song.
I thought for just a half a second that was a cell phone that Geordi was holding.
That's the thing, is that it's like, that's what our minds are programmed to think. Like, people are going to watch this just like the original series and not get that, like, that's not a technology that existed at that time. So Geordi's going to give Guinan the 411 on what's going on with this Borg. And she is still quite hard to convince, but
she's still Guinan's traumatized. And this is, I don't want to say it's a character flaw or fault, but she is reliving her trauma by trying to steer these crazy wayward humans onto the path out of destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's really upset. Like, why are you treating this like a lost child? Why are you sympathizing? This is the enemy. He's going to kill you. When his family shows up, you will be dead.
She is like a Oh, go ahead.
I was just about to say, so Geordi's kind of feeling bad about sending Hugh in as a walking bomb, and Voyager did the inverse of this episode. You remember when they found a whole bunch of refugees that turned their children into walking bombs for the Borg?
Mhm.
And we kind of demonized that practice, yet we're doing it here.
Yeah, and it's a theme that is still going on in Star Trek, currently on the show Prodigy right now. But that's the thing, is that remind me to come back to what we could compare Guinan's position culturally to. But if they were really out there, if the Borg were really out there in the Delta Quadrant, they wouldn't necessarily need to do like big assimilations. They could just like target certain vulnerable types of people and just have them go over to the Borg voluntarily. You'd always have your sullen teen or your adult that is just tired of trying anymore. Like, whatever, I'm going to be a Borg now.
You know, I hate to sound a little offensive here, but that's what the military does.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
So they could go to Manhattan, set up a little kiosk and just give you the tour.
Yeah, you don't need the draft. People are gonna show up. But the Borg to Guinan is like they're like the army, the U.S. Army occupying Japan after the bombings.
Oh,
he is somebody that lived in Hiroshima or Nagasaki, and death just came from above for no reason that she can understand. And now she has to meet a representative of that culture and have to see it as human when what she sees it as is just a force of destruction.
So she's telling her story now to the Borg, to you. When your people came, we resisted. Actually, I think what makes this work is that Hugh is so open-ended. He asks open-ended questions, which kind of people tend to talk and volunteer a lot of information when you ask open-ended questions. So it really helps move the plot along, but it's also a great way to kind of manipulate Guinan and the others. If Hugh was adversarial, more robot-like, or even more like 7 of 9, they just say, screw this bozo. Yeah. Send him back, because you couldn't make a connection. You can't find common ground. And in any critical conversation, whether it's for the purpose of turning someone into a bomb, like they're trying here, manipulating them, or actually trying to become allies with the previous enemy, you always have to find common ground. So what's the common ground here? I would almost argue that the common ground is empathy.
Yeah.
Because Hugh is learning not everybody wants to assimilate, and he's asking a lot of assimilation questions. I don't think he understands that some people don't want to join the club.
Mm-hmm. He may have been Borg from basically birth too. I want to say 7 of 9 never got her Annika memories back. Is that correct?
Here and there, but not completely. I think that's one of the things that drives her as an angry individual, is that she was hurt in her childhood, stolen, and she could never move past that. So we're driving home the I am Geordi, I am making decisions for myself. For someone like me, losing that sense of individuality is almost worse than dying.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like talking to a person who's been a vegetarian from birth, I mean, I hate to be so crass about it, but if you've only lived one way your entire life and not knowing the other, all of a sudden you lose perspective of what's right or wrong, because what's right for me might be a total dictatorial move by another person just based off of your cultural subset values.
Yeah, he's going to feed that Borg a big bowl of chicken hearts and bone marrow.
Okay. All right. So here's my first technical problem with this. Data's a pretty smart android. And if Data's head does not explode by looking at this picture, what makes them think it'll work on the Borg?
Data's not connected to any Data's not part of a collective.
He's not in a network.
Yeah, he is an individual, and that's been proven.
Okay, so because of his individuality, he's spared from the logic paradox problem that this impossible shape creates. So for those who are not listening along, the plan is to introduce a geometric shape that should not exist, but does exist, but you can't prove exists, creating a paradox, which will mean that other Borg will be called in to solve this geometric problem and then somehow bring down the system. I'm not really sure. They didn't really go into it too deep, but apparently it will hurt the networking ability of the Borg rather than having them work as a collective. So anyway, we are now, Geordi is talking to Picard saying, this doesn't seem right. He's kind of homesick. It's kind of strange how Picard brings up the lab rat example. So the lab rat example is centuries ago, we had laboratory animals and people would get attached to the specimens, even knowing they had to eliminate those specimens to complete their research. And it's funny because that's a very typically non-Picard line of thinking.
Except that he has every right to feel the way that he feels about the Borg.
Oh, well, yeah, he's victimized.
They literally aren't individuals, except for Hugh, which is what Guinan's going to suggest to him. It's one person. It's one person acting through the bodies, or it's one collective, many bodies. So they did do it to him. It's not, when I said that about Guinan, obviously the occupying army are not the same. The people who occupied Japan are not the same individuals that dropped those bombs.
Yeah.
They're part of the same culture, but they aren't the ones who personally dropped the bombs. But that's what's so crazy about these, wide scale battles like this, is that your enemy is a representation of the people that that either hurt you or that hurt the people that are feeding you.
It reminds me, and I try not to bring up politics so much, but at the time of recording this, I almost really screwed it up. There is a war with Ukraine and Russia, and they have a shared cultural heritage. And I wonder about those Russian soldiers. Are the Ukrainians going to be angry at the soldiers, or are they going to be angry at the organization that sent those soldiers in? So when you use your Japan Hiroshima example, that comparison resonates throughout time, really, where because you stood against us or represented something against us, then do I judge you now as an individual versus your corporate actions? And that's a true leap right there for mankind. You could look at the trader's paradox, where someone has to betray their culture in order to advance an ethical issue. Like Picard is going to do, give aid and comfort to the enemy, as you had suggested. So,
and notice how tiny Hugh is till that scene.
Yeah, he's so small, teeny. Now here, I always felt like this was like the Asimov test here, where he goes, "I am Locutus of Borg." Like, I think he wants to deliberately trigger this guy's programming.
Well, and he recognizes him. He recognized now they saw each other. What's funny is they saw each other before, and Hugh didn't call him Locutus. But now that he's learned about individuals, he does see him as Locutus. And he's almost like, hey, I have another Borg I can talk about this with. Could you imagine if they could interface, what would happen?
Oh my gosh. Things would accelerate quickly.
Yep.
Well, this is a really important part of the storytelling, because had Picard not been abducted by the Borg, this conversation wouldn't be able to happen. Mm-hmm. So what we need an ultimate litmus test. Will this Borg just go on being a Borg, or has he truly changed? So it's kind of like the reformed convict question, just because they served their time, does that mean they're not going to reoffend or hurt somebody, blah, 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 blah. And I very much see this because Locutus is a person of some importance in the Borg culture, as Hugh's recognition of Locutus is. And now we have Hugh reporting out to Locutus, this is not going to work, and people should not die. And without this piece of dialogue, it would be much more difficult to prove that Hugh has changed sides, more or less. He's chosen to be an individual. So my question to you, I'm kind of monologuing here. My question to you is, if we did not have this scene, how could Hugh demonstrate that he has kind of flipped sides?
In the next part where they talk to one another, and Hugh does the whole, I can't bargain my life against the life of everybody on your ship. That could still happen.
Okay. For action adventure, I could see him say, like, accidentally getting out and walking through the ship, and everybody sees it as a jailbreak, but he's just really curious about his environment. And let's say he comes across some very vulnerable adult or child or crew member, not like a civilian. Mm-hmm. And he just says, oh, I'm not going to hurt this person. Here you go. Like, he actively stands down rather than doing the whole assimilation routine.
We don't know is, what about anybody that was friends with or related to when the Borg cut that chunk out of the ship the first time?
Oh, yeah.
We really don't know anybody that was personally affected by that.
And this is a generational ship. Obviously, they have families that live there for a very long time. There could be survivors.
Yep.
And so this conversation, it's another conference room conversation about what should we do? Erase his memory, use the original plan, or let him simply go forward with his individuality. Maybe his positive experience with us will make a big impact upon the Borg.
Yep.
Now, if you did not pay attention to any of the future Borg episodes, we know this would not work. But up until this point, because we didn't have too many definitions about the Borg, you could free write like this. In fact, I I kind of agree with what you said several episodes ago when Locutus came around, is that the Borg were a little too powerful. And that I like the concept of individuality is a great weakness, and that's why they're so authoritarian. They should have always left that weakness in there, that the collective always has to rein in people who want to be individuals.
In a fantasy story, which, I mean, that's the thing, is that Star Trek oscillates between being, utopian speculation fiction and being a fantasy like Star Wars. The Borg come out of fantasy. They're like Darth Vader in the very first Star Wars movie. They are just bad. There is no good there. But if you want to keep telling stories, just like in Return of the Jedi, there has to be some good in the Borg. There has to be something that can be redeemed. And we've seen that a couple of times. And I have a feeling that we're going to see that more in Picard this season. But yeah, when you first see them, they're just pure evil.
But now that we've had time to hang out with them and get to know them, it's a little harder to pull that trigger.
Yep.
It's kind of like naming your cow before you kill it. I would like to choose to stay with Geordi. So I missed it. Did they ask the asylum question?
They did.
Okay, yeah, but it's too dangerous. They will try to follow. Return me to the crash site. Okay, so he is in an interesting sideways way. His decision was still Borg-like, where he chose to sacrifice himself for the good of the collective.
Yeah.
He's like, these are my friends. They've given me individuality. And so for me to honor that gift, I need to surrender my individuality and choose to sacrifice myself to the group.
But they're betting on, whether or not it works or not, they're betting on the idea that his memories of the Enterprise will be so pleasant that that there will be some change. Here's what I think, though, is what would really happen is the collective would have the memories, but not the feelings attached with them. So think about was they brought him in, they put him in a cell, they told him everything about his way of life was wrong, and made him not want to assimilate anymore. Your response to that as a Borg is not going to be Federation good. It's going to be Federation needs to be assimilated.
Now if we took this the other way and the Borg ship found a lone ensign on a planet next to a crashed shuttle and put that ensign in a cell for a week and just had conversations about assimilation, that ensign came out wanting to assimilate. So I'm almost wondering if we're looking at like a Stockholm syndrome kind of situation here.
Well, the only one that could do that is a character that, in 1992, when this came out, didn't exist, which is the Borg Queen. And she did it with Data in the movie.
That's right. She gave him some skin and played on some emotions. Oh, she forced his emotion chip on and then manipulated those emotions. Basically, she pulled a Lore.
The Borg, as they are now, couldn't do that. They don't have the ability to negotiate. It's just like resistance is futile. They'd find the ensign. They would just immediately turn him into a Borg. There would be no, thought or anything about that.
So it could be safe to say that we just happen to be witnessing a transformation of how the Borg operate in this 30-year period. So we came just as we see the Federation ending its colonizing period and moving to diplomacy because they've colonized most of the space they can work with, and then move into internal stuff. with the Borg, they kind of move from an autonomous collective to introducing more of a hierarchy for command and control. Like it's always been there, but now it's very present. I've always kind of liked the whole worker ant mentality, where if you're not in the way, you're not a threat.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, that makes me feel very safe.
And that's what the Borg were supposed to be when you first saw them. They were supposed to be insects, and they just couldn't afford to do it that way. The Borg were supposed to be the species that had come into Starfleet Command in season 1.
Oh, God.
Bodies.
And they had that really nasty season ender that almost got an NC-17 rating.
I know.
Oh, boy, that's a Star Trek you don't see every day.
Very true.
Oh, there you go. Hugh kind of looked at Geordi one last time.
So
off they go.
I give this one 5 out of 5. I think it's one of the tightest episodes of the show ever. Great showing from all of the characters. Everybody gets a moment in it. I was looking to see if this got a novel based on it. It's interesting which episodes of the show they picked to novelize. They didn't do a novel of this, but they did a novel of the sequel to it, Descent, which is not a good 2-parter at all.
No, not at all.
So I just ordered the book because I'm like, I wonder if they made it a better story in the book, because I've heard that that's something that they do, is that when it's fleshed out in novel form, it's made better. Yeah. So once in a year's time, when we're talking about The Descent, I will have read that book and be able to comment a little bit more on, what some more ideas about that were. But as far as this episode goes, it's great. I remember it vividly as a kid. The whole Hugh idea really pulled me in. I remember at 10, 2 years is a long time. That Best of Both Worlds was, a distant memory, other than that, we thought Picard wouldn't come back from that. But it affected me emotionally, and it affected, my mom, who was our age back then, 42. Or I guess she was 40 when that episode came out. But so, it didn't just affect the characters on the show, it affected the audience watching. So we talk all the time about there's no real stakes here. We know that they're going to succeed. We didn't know what the outcome of this was going to be. This was an episode where it was truly a mystery. When I said it was, taking A Measure of a Man to 11, we know Dave's going to be fine in Measure of a Man. We don't know how, but we didn't know. We had no idea until this episode ended what was going to happen to Hugh on the Enterprise. Mm-hmm. And that speaks to how good of an episode it is. Yeah,
no, I agree. And I think the reason why we fell in love with Hugh is because we didn't know what was going to happen with him. So we're looking at a writing style where everything resets by the end of the episode. But everything resetting means that Hugh either walks away from the Borg and joins the Federation and is ferried off to a starbase and we never see him again, or he goes back. But the question is, how do you develop the story to get to that choice? So the stories are always about the choice, but never the follow through. And I think, again, that's why, Descent is such a terrible episode, because we don't see a very good arc with Hugh. And then again, in the Picard series, it just, I think the purpose of his story arc got lost.
Definitely.
So yes, I'm very interested to see where this novel goes. And novels don't have to reset at the end of the novel. They can just keep on going. They can spend as much time as they need to develop a thought and execute it. Whereas TV, we got to squeeze in 5 or 6 acts in 40 minutes.
Depending on when I read the book, I will pass it on to you when I'm done, so we can both talk about what the similarities and differences are.
Great. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right.
So
So
you
my
know what episodes they got novels. It's an interesting list.
well, it also tells you where the good and bad episodes were. So an episode can be bad, but still good enough to get a book because it dropped enough intrigue where it left the person asking for more. So I would give go ahead.
What I was going to say is what we get as novels is Encounter at Farpoint, Reunification, Descent, and All Good Things.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know All Good Things was a novel too.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Well, my reading for this episode, again, 5 out of 5. It's on my watch list. If I am looking for an episode to watch, I seriously consider this one. I love the questions. Anytime where you have to evaluate an enemy and question your own value system, I'm a big fan of. So it pulls my heartstrings for sure. I just wish we could have gotten a few love letters from Hugh. Maybe he and Data could have had a dialogue. That would have been neat.
Yes.
I got my monthly letter from Hugh, and along with all his espionage content, he discovered flowers. All right. Well, folks, that's about it. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure always. I think our next episode is a brilliant accidental lower decks episode. The next phase.
That's a fun one. I'm excited to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, until then, folks, I'd like to say have a wonderful day. Music provided by lofigirl.com. Artists include Tenno, Daydreaming, BVG in Mondberg, Insomnia, WYS, Snowman, Be Calm and Banks, Because. Episode cover art created by Matthew Kirschner. Podcast logo and main cover art provided by David Clawwitter. Audio engineering done by Sascha Schaudies.